Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be going through the 10 books that I read in July. Yeah, it's July. I read a good collection, mainly fantasy and romance, which is usual actually for me. I did read one horror and one thriller as well. And I suppose one horror fantasy. But yeah, we'll just go through all of them. So here are 9. I read 9 physical and 1 on my Kindle. So yeah, these are the books that I read. You can probably guess 2 of them just from the spines. But yeah, I had a great reading month. I had so many 5 stars this month. Loved it. So yeah, let's just dive in. How I'm going to film this, whether I do it in order of the books, like in the order that I read them, or from least favourite to favourites. I think I might do least favourites to favourites. My least favourite, I read The Cat Who Caught a Killer by L.T. Shearer. Yeah, this was just a super cozy thriller, murder mystery about a cat who can talk called Conrad, I think he was called. Yeah, Conrad. And he meets up with a retired detective and there's a murder and the detective and the cat go and find out who murdered the person. It was very sweet, very cozy. I think I gave it 3.5. It was like nice, but I don't think I'd read it again. A, because I know who did the murder, and B, just because, I don't know, it was just a little bit slow at times, but it was very, yeah, it was just like a nice cozy thriller. But yeah, 3.5. That was my lowest rating all month though. So I had a good reading month. Next are my 4-star books. So this was the first book I read, oh no, it was the second book I read this month. And that was You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Bayron. This was like the perfect homage to like classic 80s slasher films. It was about a young woman called Charity Curtis who plays a character at Camp Mirror Lake, which is basically where a mass murder took place years ago. And they've opened it up almost like, you know those haunted houses when people get chased around? It's kind of like one of those, but in a summer camp setting. And she plays the final girl, so the person who survives. But there's like booby traps and people running around chasing you. Yeah, it sounds like a really cool idea on its own, but then people actually do start dying and something's going on in this camp. So yeah, it was really good. Very much like a classic slasher horror, but I did really enjoy it. I did give it 4 stars. So yeah, my next 4-star was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I did really enjoy this. It really delved into the lore of fairies and I really liked that. It read as a diary of a researcher who was researching fairies basically. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I did really enjoy it. It was a little bit slow, I'd say like a third in for maybe like 50 pages. It got just a little bit slow, which is probably why it wasn't a 5-star. But other than that, it was so interesting and the fairies were so bizarre in this book. The fae were really bizarre. And there were like loads of different categories of fae. And it was just really interesting. It was so cool. It was like a researcher's diary into the fae. And I loved Emily Wilde's character. I really liked her character. And I loved Bamblebee. I really loved Wendell Bamblebee as well. I loved his character as well. And plus the Fairy Loot book. So those are the 2 main characters. That's Emily Wilde and that's Bamblebee and that is her dog, which I can't remember the name of the dog. And then yeah. How cool is that? So yeah, I gave it a 4-star. I really enjoyed it, but it just was a little bit slow for about 50 pages. But other than that, 4 out of 5, really enjoyed it. And then my last 4 out of 5 was the one Kindle book I read, and that was Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. Darcy Coates, you know it by now, she's like my favourite author ever. And she brought out a new book, so I had to read it, so I bought it the day it came out and read it the day it came out. It was more of a murder mystery thriller this time, but also a slasher instead of like classic horror story that she writes. Like it was still horror, don't get me wrong, but basically this couple go to this isolated retreat up in the snowy mountains and on the way they find themselves stranded due to a fallen tree. They found themselves stranded in a cabin and people start to die, basically. in this big group, and it's very isolating. I really enjoy, you know, you're thrown in with like 15 different characters right from the beginning. You have no idea who any of them are. And throughout the book you get to know their personalities, but there's a lot of suspicion, you know, like there's just this group of people, but they're in the middle of nowhere and people are dying, so one of them's got to be a killer, and the tensions are really raised, and it was really good. I really did enjoy it. I will say the only reason I gave it 4 out of 5 is that I predicted who was the killer within like 40 pages. And I'm really annoyed at myself, but I don't know, I just guessed it. I just had an inkling, I guessed it, and it turned out to be right. And then I read the reviews and everyone was like, I had no idea who the killer was, it was such a surprise, blah blah blah. And I was like, why do I gotta do that to myself? Why did I have to guess it? And I just, like, the entire way through I was like, it's this person, it's obviously this person. But yeah, so that's the only reason I gave it 4 out of 5, because other than that it was really good. I just really wish that I hadn't been able to guess who the killer was. So that's why I got 4 and not a 5. And then I do have some 4.5 out of 5 books. So I've got 2 4 out of 5 books. But I don't know, now that I'm like thinking back, I probably would give one of them 4 stars instead of 4.5. I don't know. Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I've read all of Ali Hazelwood's books at this point. What was there? Love Hypothesis, Love on the Brain, Loath to Love You, which is the collection of 3 short stories, which I actually really enjoyed those. And then, yeah, Love Theoretically. I really enjoyed this as well. I feel like at this point Ali Hazelwood pretty much just writes the exact same book every time, just with a few differences, and I still just eat it up. Like, I just eat these books up. They're so good. I really enjoy them. I just have a good time reading them. This one definitely hit a little bit too close to home because the main character was a serious, like, people pleaser, and it was about her trying not to be a people pleaser, which is literally me, something I really struggle with. So yeah, it was a little bit hard to read at times. It was like reading a therapy session in a book, but the romance was really good and I loved the main characters. Yeah, it was a really solid read, 4.5. And then I can't tell you the other 4.5 without telling you one of the 5 stars because it was part of a duology. So I read the It Happened One Summer and Hook, Line and Sinker duology by Tessa Bailey. It Happened One Summer was a 5-star, a new favourite romance for me. I absolutely devoured this, I ate it up. And then Hook, Line and Sinker was a 4.5. But this is the one I'm thinking, like, it's either between 4 or 4.5. It just wasn't, like, this was peak, peak romance for me. I absolutely loved it. It is definitely one of my all-time favourite new romances, and I did not think it would be at all, but I loved it. And this was really good fun as well. I just didn't love the main characters as much as I did this one. Really good romances. It Happened One Summer is about a really spoilt LA socialite that basically annoys her father one too many times, stepfather one too many times, and has to go into this remote fishing village to kind of make things up to him. And she meets this rugged fisherman called Brendan, and it's just like absolute opposites attract. Piper is this famous socialite on social media, and she's rich, like a millionaire, and Brendan is like the local captain fisherman of the town. But it was so good. I ate the books up so much. And then Hook, Line and Sinker is Piper's sister and Brendan's best friend. Yeah, still really good. Not as good as It Happened One Summer, but still really good. Yeah, but I absolutely loved It Happened One Summer, if you hadn't already guessed. And then my last 3 5-star books, and I don't know which was my favourite. Actually, I think I do. Yeah, so one of them was Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson, and I got the nice sprayed edge version. I loved this book so much. It was much darker than her usual fantasy books. So I've read all of Margaret Rogerson's fantasy books at this point, and this was definitely the darkest. It was more like a horror fantasy. It was about this main character called Artemisia. I really struggled with that name. And she can see spirits, basically. And her convent, where she was brought up and raised, is attacked by a sea of spirits. Artemisia defends it by awakening a revenant, which is an ancient, super powerful spirit. And basically the story unravels, you know, they find out who's behind the attacks. I just really loved the relationship between her and the Revenant, and I'm hoping that's not saying too much. It isn't, you get that quite early in the book. But I really love the relationships in this book. I love the main character. I loved Artemisia so much. She was such a relatable character, and that's one thing I've come to realise with Margaret Rogerson works, is that all of her characters I find really relatable, and I really enjoy the characters. I find them really deep, you know, they've got a lot of depth to the character, and yeah, I just always love the people that she writes. So Vespertine was one of my absolute favourites of the month. This was a 5 out of 5. And then my absolute, I feel like these were both 5 out of 5s, but one of them was like peak favourite, but they come together. So yeah, my absolute favourite of the month was Sorcery of Thorns, again by Margaret Rogerson, and then I picked up Mysteries of Thorn Manor by Margaret Rogerson. This is like, it's almost like an extended epilogue novella to the Sorcery of Thorns, so you have to read this first, then this. But I love these so much. I loved them. I absolutely adored it. This was about a young woman called Elizabeth here, and she works in a library, but it's not a regular library because the books are magical and they're alive, and there are like different tiers to the books, and it was just so good. You know, things start going wrong in the libraries, people start dying, and she goes on a mission to find out what's going on, and she teams up with a sorcerer called Nathaniel Thorne and his demonic servant Silas, who, I don't know if you can see, yes you can, so here's Elizabeth and here's Nathaniel, and then at the top, can you see? That's Silas. He's a cat, but he can turn into a human, but he's a cat. Yeah, I loved this so much, you guys. It just hit every like YA fantasy point that I needed it to do. It was fantastic. The characters are amazing. I loved the romance. I loved the fantasy element. I loved the magic. The magical books were amazing. They were like a character in and of itself. And I fell in love with Elizabeth. Her character was just, I loved it. I loved her so much, I can't tell you. And then, yeah, Mysteries of Thorn Manor was like an extended epilogue after that, which I absolutely loved. This was like, I was just kicking my feet like a little 12-year-old girl when I was reading this because it made me so happy. So yeah, Mysteries of Thorn Manor and Sorcery of Thorns were my favourite reads of the month, hands down. Maybe one of my favourite reads of the year, but I don't know if they're my favourite Margaret Rogerson books, because I absolutely adored Vespertine, and I also really loved Enchantment of Ravens, which I read like a year or two ago now, and I'd love to do a reread to see if it lives up to the hype of Sorcery of Thorns. But yes, these were... Margaret Rogerson just put something in her books that I cannot get enough of. Yeah, so absolutely loved both of these, even though I read this like 2 years ago. But yeah, Sorcery of Thorns is my favourite of the month. So yes, those were all the books that I read this month. I had a great reading month. I had one 3.5 and the rest were all 4-star or above, and I had 3 5-star reads, so 30% of the books I read were 5 stars, which is amazing. Yeah, so I had a fantastic reading month. I really enjoyed myself, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, I will hopefully see you guys in the next one. Alright, bye guys.